Have you ever saved up for something, finally bought it, and then felt, meh? Turns out, you're not alone. Not by a long shot. We're terrible at predicting how happy things will make us before we get them. Here's why, and here's how to hack your brain to make you a little smarter about it. Okay, so let's talk about why we get it wrong. Why we do this. There are a few different things going on here. The first is a little something called impact bias. Basically, impact bias is our tendency to overestimate the intensity and the duration of our emotional reactions to future events. And when it comes to buying things, we overestimate how happy or how miserable a purchase will make us. The second thing that is in play here is something called hedonic adaptation, sometimes also known as the hedonic treadmill. Essentially, no matter what happens in our life, no matter what changes we go through, whether they're positive or negative ones, at a certain point, we reset back to our happiness set point. Basically, there's a default level of happy that we are, and we can only be really miserable or really happy for so long before we drift back to this emotional mean. So that shiny new thing that we bought, it stops being exciting surprisingly fast. We yo-yo back. And finally, there's a third factor in this mix, and that's something called expectation inflation. What that means is that the more we anticipate a purchase, the more likely it is to disappoint us. Ooh, doesn't speak well for the fantasy of the new car commercial with the bow on it, does it? Plus, none of this is helped by the fact that longing is a fantasy and ownership is when reality kicks in. So the difference psychologically between I want this, oh, I want this, and I own this, it belongs to me, is a massive gulf. And part of this is because a bunch of new problems arise once we actually own things. Stuff like maintenance, how much it's cluttering up the house, guilt, opportunity cost.
Wait, what?
Opportunity cost is really interesting, something that we don't think about a lot. And that's the fact that when you're pouring time and effort into one thing or one course of action, it leaves you less time and energy or money to pour into other courses of action. And that totally happens with home ownership. So let's say you got a pool. You're really excited about getting a pool at your house and you're finding you have to do a whole bunch of maintenance on it, skimming it, putting chemicals in. And you're like, the amount of time that I'm spending maintaining this pool, I could be off having vacations all over the place, and casually dipping into a pool is part of that. That's a good example of opportunity cost. Sometimes those are hard to imagine before you're actually in the scenario. Or it could be something like buying a fancy espresso machine and then realizing that it's a lot of work and hassle to operate it. There are a lot of steps involved, cleaning it, maintaining it is difficult, and then you'd rather just use your old French press. I've seen that happen too with a friend of mine. Okay, so we have a good sense of what the problems are here, why this is happening, why the expectation and the reality of buying something can be completely different. So what do we do with this? How do we outsmart our brains?
Show us what it looks like to see a man's brains explode.
It's not simple. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of awareness, and I feel like it's been a quest that I've been on in my life for many years. I will say that it's been worth all the effort, and it has been a huge factor in why I've been upwardly mobile in my life financially, is that I've gotten better at realizing that buying things isn't necessarily going to make me as happy as I think it will. And here are a couple of quick tips to get you started if you want to explore this some more. The first thing you can do to outsmart your brain is something called the 30-day rule. So you're putting in a delayed gratification barrier, but you're making it very concrete. And basically, you set a waiting period for buying things, especially anything discretionary or fun. You say, okay, well, I want this. I'm gonna set a reminder on my calendar in a month. And if I still want it, it's probably not impulse driven. I tend to do this a lot. I've done this with actually rather small items. I've kind of scaled it down and I found it to be really helpful. Now, sometimes you still want the thing, but I found probably good 3/4, 90% of the time, I'm like, nah, I don't really need that pot holder, that pan, that game, whatever that item was that picked me up. I went off and I did something similar with something I already had and it scratched the itch and it was fine. Another thing you can do is to rent or test out an item first. So we're talking about the swimming pool. If you have a friend or know somebody that has a swimming pool, maybe shadow the maintenance. Like, the tasks with them, talk to them about it, hang out with them. In our own case, we actually bought an RV and we traveled the country for 2 years with it, figuring out where we wanted to buy either a house or land. And we had a blast, honestly. But a lot of people who buy an RV have a lot of buyer's remorse. And that's because a surprising number of them have never really RV'd before, and they certainly haven't done the maintenance involved. Now, in our case, my aunt owned a travel trailer that was on a plot of land. We'd stayed in it before. We knew what it felt like to hang out there. And we also had a good friend who had an RV who was on Justin's auto racing team. My husband does some motorsport stuff. It's one of his hobbies. But one of his teammates had an RV and we stayed with them. And not only did we stay with them, Justin and I were very much seeing what kind of maintenance he had to do, the resource management. We chatted with him honestly about it. And that, in addition to our actual research, made it so we were really well prepared. We always recommend that you do that. You either have a friend or a family member that you can kind of guest RV with and take that route. Or if you don't, then there are RV rental services. They can be pretty expensive. In our own case, we were able to accomplish it by shadowing with friends and family and asking questions and helping them with some of the maintenance. But yeah, definitely something expensive like that. Find somebody that has it or rent it, test it out, see how you feel. The next thing you can do is to invest in experiences more than stuff. So this one's kind of neat. All of the stuff I'm talking about today, as far as the psychological phenomena and the way that things don't make us happy, it applies more to material items. It's funny because one of the things that tends to overperform and work in the other direction is experiences and meaningful memories. Frankly, that's one of the reasons we got the RV, because traveling and having adventures tends to appreciate. But you don't have to go on the road for 2 years to get this. Even stuff like a meaningful walk, making friends, those things can appreciate and be much more fulfilling than they feel in theory. Like, it's funny because sometimes I'll get these ruts. I'll be like, oh, I don't want to go do this new thing. Oh, I don't want to go meet new people. And then it ends up being like the best thing. It ends up blowing me away. So it's kind of like the anti-stuff, if you will, in terms of psychology. Like, stuff tends to underwhelm us and disappoint us, but people, experiences, connection, the opposite direction. So remember that and use it to your advantage. And finally, always consider the hassle factor. Like, be ruthless about this. Ask yourself if maintaining this, upgrading this, storing this thing will annoy you. If you don't know the answers, do some research. The internet is probably full of people who have had this thing and are complaining about it, and listen to them. And take a pessimistic outlook when you're deciding whether to get this thing. I cannot stress this enough. And actually, it kind of reminds me, this is a true story. I had once upon a time been sort of interested in getting some backyard chickens. I love animals. It seemed pretty fun. It's something that a lot of other people have gotten into. It seems glamorous, it seems useful. But my husband was a little incredulous. He was like, I don't know if this is for you. It was going to be a lot of work, and he knew it. He knew it. I had less hands-on farm experience. I'm from the Maine woods. I'm from the country, but my parents didn't have a farm or anything like that. So what I did was I went on some Facebook groups for people who kept chickens in their backyard, and I just looked at the posts and I lurked and I watched, and I do not want backyard chickens anymore. I am telling you, like, between random possums and stuff, like savaging and hurting the chickens, and chickens having diseases, and all the kind of heartbreak and life and death stuff of the farm, like, it's just a nightmare. And it was a lot of work in addition. Like, there's so many questions and hassles and a lot of people with regrets. Here's the thing though, it happens with everything. We saw in the RV forums, people complaining about things, but we noticed that these were things that we could overcome. Justin's very handy. I'm very laid back and flexible. We're both nerdy. We're go with the flow kind of people. So we decided that, even so, we could do the RV life, and we chose to do that. But backyard chickens, I am not cut out for. You're tough if you're cut out for them. I see you backyard chicken people. You're tougher than me. But it was one way I realized that it wasn't for me, and so that could have been a big thing. The chickens, I could have rehoused them and things like that, but any sort of money I would have spent on the coop structure or lights for them, like that would have been a great big waste of money for me. So I am glad I happened upon the hassle factor. The Hasselhoff. Not the Hasselhoff factor. Yikes. Hey, Hoff. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's important to slow down, and the next time that you're about to hit buy now, ask yourself, am I buying the idea of this, the fantasy of this, or will I actually use it and enjoy it long term? You might save yourself a lot of money and a lot of disappointment. Anyway, it's been great talking to you as always. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.